Okay, you can see in this picture that here's another picture of shelters, and this kind of really shows the classic issue of resulting from that different ownership. The different ownership of the shelter with the transit agency, and then the sidewalks leading to the shelter, which is the road agency usually. And in this case, you can see that it's a nice shelter, but there's no connectivity to the sidewalks. So in this slide right here, you can see that that's the same shelter as we saw in the previous slide, and that a sidewalk has been built to connect that shelter to a sidewalk as a result of this course. So a lot of times there's some easy fixes to providing better accessibility to pedestrians taking or using transit. In this picture here, you can see that this shelter is placed in the furniture zone, which provides a good, typically is a good place for a bus shelter. If you recall, in one of the previous modules, the sidewalk zone system was discussed, where the zone closest to the roadway was called the curb zone. And the zone where you place street trees, plantings, and furniture, or things such as this, which is shown in the picture here, a bus shelter, it's called the planter strip or the furniture zone. And in the zone reserved for pedestrian travel, that's the sidewalk that is just behind that shelter, as you can see in the picture. It's called the sidewalk zone. And that's really where you're creating that zone for your pedestrian kind of through traffic to go. And we looked at some examples previously where those two areas were combined. That's the kind of bus waiting area with the pedestrian travel area. And you can see here, this example just shows how it could be really a good design, or a better design, is by separating those zones. And it's really kind of getting back to that whole sidewalk zone system that was discussed before. And again, I just want to emphasize that caution should be exercised when placing shelters in the furniture zone, your intersections though, because the shelters, or even people waiting in the shelters, may create sight distance obstructions for vehicles that are turning around corners. And that's particularly an issue for right-turning vehicles when the shelter is placed on the corner, because the vehicle is making that right turn, and it's typically conflicting with pedestrians crossing in that crosswalk after they execute the right turn. That is, the crosswalk on the perpendicular street. And that's where that sight distance obstruction may occur between the shelter and the crosswalk. So now we're going to discuss a few types of facilities: pedestrian crossings, bus stop locations, and bus pullouts. So this is an overview of some of the things that we had discussed in some of the other modules. And basically, the point to take from this is that street crossings are really a critical component of transit trips, because users will have to cross the road in at least one direction if they're taking the bus in two different directions, like going to work and coming back from work. The crossing techniques that we've discussed in some of these other modules will apply to transit stops too. In this example right here, this picture, you see that this bus stop includes a raised median, textured crosswalk with white markings on the edges of the crosswalk, a pedestrian warning sign to warn or alert motorists to the presence of pedestrians crossing, advanced stop line, and lighting that could all be used by pedestrians crossing to and from the bus shelter. There are resources that FHWA has put out that help describe pedestrian safety with regard to transits, and one of those guides, or one of those resources, is the Pedestrian Safety Guide for Transit Agencies. There's two main things that I really just want to underline there. And that, one, it's an easy-to-use resource for improving pedestrian safety. Many of the techniques that have been described throughout this course are included in the manual, and those are meant to help transit agencies get a better understanding of those techniques that can be used to improve pedestrian safety, and pedestrians obviously going to and from transit stops. The other point is that this guide really emphasizes using the partnership process to discuss, determine, and find measures or ways to address safety issues for pedestrians. We showed an example before where continuity of the pedestrian network was not maintained. Partnerships between state and local road agencies can help provide a continuous network of pedestrian facilities. And even involving developers and land use planners is important too, as development may affect transit placement and pedestrian desire lines. And obviously you want your transit stops to be on those pedestrian desire lines. That's the main paths that pedestrians are taking to access their various origins and destinations. As another example, partnerships with other groups may be helpful in maintaining transit facilities too. A transit agency can implement and adopt a stop program with locals or other maintenance programs with advertisers to ensure that once the transit stop is built, that it's also maintained. And some of those things are discussed in the guide also. So I'll just give a little bit more information in terms of what's in the guide. Here's basically these 4 elements to the guide. The first is common pedestrian safety issues are described in near transit facilities. We mentioned some of them briefly. Continuity and connectivity of the transit facilities to the rest of the pedestrian network is critical. Accessibility and making sure that the facilities are accessible for all users. Visibility of the facilities and making sure that from all user perspectives there's a predictable behavior to the way the facilities are applied. The second item, engineering, education, and enforcement programs. A lot of engineering measures, of course, have been discussed throughout this course. And there's also engineering measures that deal with the bus designs themselves, or even maybe the kind of layout of the bus stops themselves too, that are kind of a little bit more than have been discussed throughout the rest of the course. There's also case studies of successful practices and techniques for identifying issues by transit agencies, and public safety campaigns, and a lot of other information. So it really provides a kind of gambit of all 4 E's in terms of how you can use the 4 E's to address pedestrian safety. The third item there is basically background information in terms of how things like walking distance, the effective motor vehicle speed, things like that really affect pedestrian safety, to provide that kind of basic core understanding to transit users. And then there's a lot of references to other applications or publications and guides and other tools that can be used to really help enhance pedestrian safety. So you can see in this photo right here, by placing the crosswalk behind the bus stop, the bus can pull forward and pedestrians can cross the street. This is important because it helps avoid these 3 things here. First, pedestrians can see traffic because instead of being in front of the bus, they're behind it, so they can see the approaching vehicles. The second thing is the bus driver can move forward after the pedestrians get off the bus, and the pedestrians will not be delaying the bus from leaving. And then, of course, kind of related to that second item is that the bus doesn't run over pedestrians as it pulls forward and leaves the bus stop. So here's a question, too, that is frequently asked in terms of bus stop replacement, is when you're placing a bus stop at an intersection, do you put it on the far side or the near side of the intersection? And the far side is basically beyond the intersection, and then the near side would be before the intersection. So the far side is generally preferred because, similar to what we had showed in the previous slide, a driver can pull across the intersection before the light turns red, or the traffic signal turns red if it's a signalized intersection. The near side can mean waiting an extra signal cycle if the bus is on the near side of the intersection, and Farside ensures that pedestrians cross behind the bus. And that's very similar to what we showed in the previous example, where it's better for pedestrians to cross behind the bus. Also, we discussed this briefly before, but another potential concern with a near-side stop is the sight distance around the corner for vehicles turning right at the intersection. There's a lot of other concerns that may have to be addressed, but that kind of just provides a good basic overview of some of those concerns in terms of placement with regard to an intersection. And next we're going to talk about what are some of the concerns of transit operators and make sure that those are properly considered. Here's some other examples, first, of why you might want to place a transit stop or a bus stop on the near side of an intersection. One of those is bus user convenience. If passengers are better served by a near side stop, it might be logical to place the bus stop on the near side of the intersection. As you can see in the picture right here, there's it shows an aerial view of an intersection, and the bus is waiting on the near side of the intersection. And that circled area is basically illustrating that the pedestrian traffic generator on that corner is really a lot higher than that on the far side of the intersection. So placing the bus stop on the near side would be more logical in this case, because you result in fewer pedestrians crossing. Another reason is near side stop allows for bus queuing. As you can see in this photo, there's two buses that are queuing on the near side of the intersection. Buses can't queue on the far side of the intersection, basically, especially if there's multiple routes that are being served on the specific location, or that's for the primary reason. If there's multiple routes being served, then you really can't place it on the far side very effectively. And if you do, the result that you see sometimes is that to accommodate the multiple routes that are being served, you push the bus stop so far downstream from the intersection that you end up with a lot of mid-block crossings. So one of the final reasons for placing the bus stop on the near side is if the bus makes a right turn. Obviously, you have to accommodate the routes that the buses are taking. So here's an example of how moving, eliminating, or consolidating bus stops may improve pedestrian safety. You see in this example right here, there's a mid-block bus stop, and that mid-block bus stop could be eliminated if there's other bus stops that are closer to intersections that may better serve pedestrians. And again, one of the things that you're really trying to ensure is that you're providing adequate crossings to bus stops. So in this case right here, you eliminate the mid-block crossing, but there's still you eliminate the mid-block bus stop, which would help eliminate mid-block crossings perhaps. But you still have bus stops on either end of that roadway segment. So, you might be causing pedestrians a little bit longer walk, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. But if you do this throughout an entire system of bus stops, then you might end up with a much shorter bus ride. So that's kind of the trade-offs. And with anything that we're talking about here, it's important to recognize that this is just some basic rules, and you have to really delve into the issues to get a better understanding of what are maybe the consequences of trying one of these strategies. So next, we're going to talk about bus pullouts. Oops. Okay. Bus pullouts may keep traffic flowing, but bus drivers sometimes don't like them if they can't pull back out into traffic. And obviously this is more of a concern in areas where you do have a lot of congestion. There are some operational things that can be done to address this. Several states have adopted laws that give buses the right-of-way if a flashing yield light or a static yield sign is used. This may cut down on transit providers' opposition to bus pullouts. Some states have used the flashing signs, others use the static version, which may be less effective. Currently, there's about 6 states that have laws that support using the yield to bus signs on the buses. In fact, I think that there's a paper that was written on this fairly recently. I think that came out in ITE Journal in March of 2009. You can see in this picture here, this shows a bus pullout that really acts as an acceleration lane. Without the curb extension and a Farside bus pullout, really that's what it creates, is this de facto acceleration lane, increasing the crossing distance for pedestrians and creating the potential for higher speed conflicts with pedestrians and an unsafe merge with bicyclists, as you can see from this depiction. This photo exemplifies the problem illustrated in the previous slide. You can see in the photo here the pedestrian is in the crosswalk, crossing with the signal, with the walk signal, and he's facing higher speed traffic because of this Farside bus pullout. As a result of higher speed traffic, the motorists are less likely to yield to pedestrians and more serious conflicts can occur. Okay. Bus pullouts must work for all users, basically. With the curb extensions, and this is something that was described in one of the previous modules, the benefits of curb extensions. But here we're just illustrating the effect or benefit of using curb extensions with regard to pedestrians in transit. So with that curb extension, you see right-turning vehicles must make the turn more slowly because it's really effectively a shorter corner radius, and they enter the stream of traffic before accelerating. This is typically safer for pedestrians and cyclists and other drivers because it's a less ambiguous space, and again, you're really affecting driver behavior and driver speeds going around that right turn. So this is an example of a well-designed pullout, similar to the previous slide. You can see here the curb at the intersection is brought out to create kind of a bulbout. You may notice too that with the kind of bulbout and the bus pullout area, that pedestrians may have to walk a little bit further to reach the bus stop. But if everything is properly designed, the speeds of traffic will be slower and the crossings for pedestrians will be shorter, resulting in a much safer pedestrian network. Okay, you can see in this example, this shows how curb extensions can be used effectively in conjunction with providing improved transit service. Typically up to about 80 feet of a no parking zone must be established for a bus to pull right up to a curb. The curb extension saves that parking, meaning that the spaces are still there, and then the time for loading and unloading passengers is reduced because pedestrians are waiting closer to where they board or alight the bus. Okay, this picture right here just shows an illustration of the previous graphic. That a passenger is ready to board the bus immediately because they're waiting closer to where the bus is pulling up. This can save 10 or even more seconds per stop, comparing to having the bus pull into the normal curb. This doesn't sound like a lot, but from a bus operator standpoint, when you consider that along the whole route, it really helps cut down on dwell time. So, that was a quick overview of pedestrian safety in transit. And again, the main point is is that a lot of the things that have been discussed previously, particularly with good elements for creating crossings for pedestrians, those apply to ensuring that pedestrians have adequate or safe access to transit. So what is the pedestrian safety concern at every transit stop? The need to safely cross the street. What are the main considerations for transit stop location? User convenience, accessibility, and safety. And what are some transit operators' concerns? The ability to move into traffic, especially in areas where there is a lot of congestion. And what are some of the other road users' needs? Is that pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists all need to navigate safely around transit stops. So, you should be able to describe why transit stops must be convenient and accessible, apply the techniques to help transit users cross the street at transit stops, assess if transit operators' concerns are met, and assess the needs of other road users. And again, recall that transit is more than just buses on the road. It's the interaction between buses and all the other road users on the roadway. So at this time, I'd like to open the floor up to questions.
Alrighty, thank you, Dan. We now have time for some questions. Please enter your questions into the box on your screen. Again, if we run out of time for your question, we'll attempt to answer it and get back to you after the program. Okay, it looks like our first question asks, can you use the bus pullout as a U-turn area as well?
The bus pullout as a U-turn area.
Yeah.
I guess what you're saying is a bus pullout on the right side of the roadway or a bus pullout on the left side of the roadway?
It doesn't look like the asker specified. If the user or the asker would like to resubmit that question, we can get that answered for you.
Okay.
All right, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next question, and we'll follow up with the previous question. The next question asks, I note bike lanes with solid lines at some bus stops. What's your opinion about bike lanes on busy bus corridors with bus stops?
Well, you know, the thing that you try to ensure when you have a mixing of modes is that the different modes are, one, aware of each other, and that, two, speeds are compatible. So in certain situations, it works fine, and in others it may not. But if you have those two basic elements, awareness of each other, other users, that's one thing, and then the compatible speeds, that really helps ensure that you have a more safe design. And that's why in urban areas it's more acceptable to have that type of design than maybe in more suburban or rural areas where you might have a greater speed differential and less awareness of bicyclists.
Okay, we'll move to the next question. Are there guides or standards which would assist in the development of policies to limit interaction between bus, auto, and pedestrians at major transit hubs?
Well, first of all, the Pedestrian Safety Guide for Transit Agencies provides a list of a lot of other resources that are available that might help describe some of the conditions or concerns. When you're dealing with major transit hubs, and in almost any situation, you have to really ensure that you have a good understanding of how people are actually using the roadway. Very often, a lack of understanding occurs when there's, assumptions made that people are using the facilities that are designed to be used a certain way. Well, in actuality, people don't always use it that way. Like, if you have a bike lane, sometimes people aren't always using the bike lanes as intended. So it's important to, understand how people are using the roadway. Really looking at things from the human factors perspective. So that way you have a good understanding of the issue. When you have a good understanding of the issue, then hopefully you'll be able to come up with ways to address the specific concerns that are occurring, you know, at the area in question. And since we're talking about you know, areas where there's probably a lot of modal interaction, then you know, that's particularly important. And again, I just want to emphasize having looking at the pedestrian safety guide for transit agencies, because that does give you a good overview. But let me just say go one step further and give you one basic principle, is that what is helpful to do if you can afford, you know, if you can afford the space and everything, is to create designated paths for different users, you know, to really ensure that those are clearly understood and that they're meeting the desire lines for the different users. Because pedestrians will have a different way of approaching a situation than a bicyclist will, as will a motorist. So if you're able to create delineated paths that each address all the modes, then you will end up with maybe a more complex system, but something that would minimize conflicts between the different users and provide a safer situation in general.
Okay. The next question asks, do you have examples or successes in consolidating transit stops in regards to people with disabilities?
Can you say that again, David?
Sure. Do you have examples of successes in consolidating transit stops in regards to people with disabilities?
That's a good question. That's something I might have to look into a little bit. I know that I do have some examples of successes of consolidating bus stops for people as a whole, but I'm not certain that they would specifically address the needs of people with disabilities, which obviously is a critical concern. Very often it's difficult to get a full appreciation for what people with disabilities have to do to reach different bus stops. That's why whenever you look at a review of the bus stop locations or changing or modifying them, it's good to get input from somebody who understands what what challenges you might face to really get to those bus stops. So again, I don't think I have anything specifically that I can say, but is there a way to provide some follow-up answers?
Yes, we'll get those posted after the presentation, and they'll be posted to the walk-in info site. Okay. And I can send that link out to the audience again. Okay. We'll move on to the next question. Do you know offhand of some examples of states that allow the yield to bus signs?
Yes, there. Like I said, I think there's about 6 states now, and in the I think the reference that I mentioned might tell you those states, but off the top of my head, I think those are Florida, Washington, Oregon, New Jersey, California, and Minnesota. Okay. And I can provide a link to the or at least the information of that ITE Journal article that had a pretty good summary of things. And there are some other resources there too, but it just seemed like that was the most recent one that came to mind. Okay, great. The next question asks, what do you think about good connections between bus and fixed rail transit stops for pedestrians? How far apart can the two stops be considered a good connection? That's a good question. I don't know if there's any great answer. I guess it depends on where the connection is occurring and everything. But you have to again consider what is the basic pedestrian behavior. If it's too far, and pedestrians really don't walk very far out of their way, the things that you kind of end up with is that pedestrians will take really the most direct route to reach, to go through that connection as possible, or to make that connection. So they might take paths that you don't want them to. So ideally, it's as close as possible on a direct route. Because again, if it's not on a direct route where they have to maybe take where they go down one path and then the right angle turn to another path, they'll most likely make a beeline for that connection, which will put them in a parking lot or a driveway or something like that, or put them in conflict with one of those things. So the closer the better, and the more direct the better too. And I guess just the question to really ask yourself even is, how far out of the way would you walk to make that connection? And very often, from a behavioral standpoint, we see that pedestrians won't go very far to make a connection, unless there's something clearly that a reason not to, which maybe it puts them on an arterial roadway or something like that. But I would certainly say that once you start making connections that are, we're talking like on-street connections, not something that's off on a separate facility. But once you start making connections that are over 250 feet or so, then you start to see a lot more different patterns in pedestrian behaviors. So I know it's not a direct answer, but again, I think if you stick with those main principles, that's kind of where we really need to begin at looking and analyzing the problem.
Okay. The next question, we may have to follow up after the program, but Dan, do you happen to have the citation for the 2009 article on right-of-way laws to re-enter traffic lanes?
No, I do not have that. I've seen it, but we can find that.
Okay, we'll find that and see if we can get that posted after the program.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question. I have a location where permissive left-turning buses keep hitting pedestrians crossing the driver's blind side. There are 4 incidents in the last couple years, including one fatal. Are there any suggestions for this situation?
Wow, that's really unfortunate to hear. But if I understand correctly, it's a permissive left turn, and so the bus is really making that permissive left turn, meaning they're really focusing in on looking at the oncoming traffic or a gap in oncoming traffic, and not really looking at the pedestrians crossing that leg of the intersection after executing that left turn. That's, we talk about using the 4 E's, and there's a lot of things that could probably be done, but one of the first things would be education, making sure that there's a very, very strict and rigorous education program for the bus drivers, because that's something that they should be aware of those conditions, and they shouldn't be doing it, obviously. But I'd say that a program to train bus drivers first. Secondly, on a site-by-site basis, you look at what kind of things could be done for the permissive left turn. Can you make a protected left-only turn, meaning that instead of getting that green ball and the motorist being able to make that left turn maneuver whenever they find a gap in oncoming traffic, they get a green arrow, and that's basically the only movement that goes. They're not looking for a gap with the oncoming traffic. They have that kind of exclusive phase. And, obviously that will have some sort of operational impact. But again, if it's something that's causing people to be injured or killed, then that's a pretty valid reason for making that change. The other thing, too, that you might want to look at is if there's the ability to have some sort of bus-only selective protective phasing. But that's kind of rare, and I would say that would be a last resort. I would say that the first few things that you want to do are, the driver training immediately, and then looking at putting up an exclusive only left turn phase. And there's other things you can do in the interim too, such as there's some signage that will help alert the presence of pedestrians. The motorists yield to pedestrian signs that were really started in New York City. Those are on MUTCD now. So there's some really short-term things that could be done just to help create greater awareness. And then, too, educating the public, the walking public, too, is helpful. But it's harder to reach them as effectively because they're kind of a larger group. At least with the bus drivers, you have a focus group right there. So I hope that's some basic guidance. And I wish you good luck in solving that problem, too.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. The next question asks, is there an electronic version of the pedestrian safety guide for transit agencies? And what I'm going to do, just in case anybody else needs a link to that, I'm going to go ahead and send that link out to the audience. So if you do need that guide or would like to view the electronic version, I just sent that link out to the audience.
Okay.
The next question asks, what are the disadvantages and advantages of an in-lane bus stop? In the travel lane, and they go on further to say, in the travel lane instead of the pullout. In what context would this be a good option?
That's a very, very good question. There are advantages and disadvantages to each of those. And a lot of it revolves around two things: operations and safety. If there's a lot of conflict or a lot of rear-end crashes or some operational effects of having the bus stopping in an actual travel lane, then that's when you consider putting in the your kind of bus pullouts. I think there is a table. There's actually a table in the Pedestrian Safety Guide for Transit Agencies which begins to describe some of those, and that was taken from TARP Transit Standards Manual, and so they have a pretty good discussion, but those are kind of the basic elements that you want to weigh, is the operations and the safety of not only the pedestrians crossing, but of having the transit vehicle stop in the roadway. And also, too, this needs to be, again, really vetted with the transit agencies and the operators, because they have, obviously, a say in this, too, and they have an understanding in terms of what motorist behaviors they have to face on a daily basis and the feasibility of having a bus pullout. Is that something that's going to really impact their ability to drive safely, or is it not? But there's some basic designs. There's the curbside stop, which could be Nearside or Farside or mid-block. There's the little bulbout, which we talked about at the beginning, talked about at the end of the presentation. There's a bus bay, and the bus bay can, could be pretty tight, or it can have a little bit longer with an acceleration or deceleration lane. And obviously, the bigger that is, the more space you're probably taking away from pedestrians. So that's the kind of negative there. There's the open bus bay, which we talked about, and some of the negative effects in that motorists turning right can use that open bus bay as an acceleration lane. And then there's a queue jumper bus bay, which is basically it's a right turn lane approaching the intersection, and then a bus pull-off area where if there's a queue at the intersection, sometimes the buses can bypass the queue at the intersection and jump ahead of the traffic. So there's a lot of different measures there, but the pros and cons are really dependent upon the operations and safety of the bus and pedestrians and all road users, because very often you'll have bicyclists on buses too, and how they access their facilities. Because a lot of these things too are constrained by the presence of parking and not parking, the presence of a bike lane or not having a bike lane. So it's more than just, I guess, what I'm saying is, while safety and operations are the main things, the whole roadway configuration is a consideration there too. But the TARC Transit Standards Manual has a pretty good discussion on that. And again, there's a summary table that's referenced in the FHWA Pedestrian Safety Guide for Transit Agencies that may be of further assistance. That could almost be a presentation by itself. So again, I apologize if it's too short of an answer, but hopefully I'm giving you a little bit that will help point you in the right direction.
Okay, we got to move on to our next question. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. Dan, to your knowledge, has anyone put detectors in downstream bus bays to call for an all-red phase from the signal in order to help the bus re-enter the traffic stream?
Wow. No, not to my knowledge. That hasn't been done. It'd be interesting to hear if anybody else has seen that anywhere.
Okay, and if anyone has and would like to share, feel free to submit that via the question box, and we can see if we can get that information relayed to the audience. We'll move on to the next question. What happens in winter when there is snow between the sidewalk and the bus stop?
Well, and that happens a lot, I understand. And that's why, it's important that, if a bus stop or a shelter, particularly this happens with shelters, if those are being implemented, that there's some sort of maintenance plan in terms of how the stop or the shelter is going to be maintained. And a lot of areas have found success with adjacent store owners adopting a stop, or local residents adopting a stop to help with clearing. A lot of agencies obviously do that themselves, but have limited budgets to do that, and it might not always be ideal. So it's always good to have different programs such as that, some sort of adopt a stop type program. Two, the other thing too is that you'll see partnerships with advertisers. If somebody has an advertisement up in a bus shelter, that they'll participate in snow removal at a bus stop. So I think the key is to have different layers that can ensure that the bus stop is adequately maintained. And again, if you have people who are in the vicinity who can assist with that, that's always been very effective from what I've seen. Either people or local business owners or a chamber of commerce or something like that. So kind of reaching out to ensuring that it's kind of a more collective effort.
Okay. The next question asks, can you give some good references for designing for pedestrians around light rail stations?
Yeah, I think FRA has a good has some good resources. One of the things that I can think of that they have is it's a compilation. I think it's called. Let me look that up. It's a compilation of pedestrian safety devices in use at grade crossings, and that basically deals pretty much with light rail. It talks about treatments such as fencing, different warning signs. Obviously, bigger stops will have grade separation or something like that potentially, especially if the system is on a different elevation. So I would consult that. That would probably be a good starting point.
Okay. The next question asks, does a road speed limit impact whether to use bus pullouts?
It can. It can. Again, I think that whenever you're looking at how to accommodate safety of buses and all users, you're looking at what is that potential for speed differential, because that's really where you find most of your problems or most of your issues. And is that speed differential, how does that affect the type of facility that you're proposing? So again, it's kind of hard for me to say without any specific examples of what you're looking at, but again, that's really what you're really trying to minimize, is that the impact of that speed differential.
Okay. The next question asks, can you give experiences with using fences to direct pedestrians in urban areas? Can you suggest a best practice guidebook for this practice?
For directing pedestrians in urban areas?
Let's see. It says, in urban areas by using fences.
In urban areas by using fencing?
Yes.
I don't know of any guide, but again, the basic thing that you're looking at is how are pedestrian desire lines accommodated. And very often, you can have a bus stop that's close to a corner, for instance. Let's say it's a Farside bus stop, like we were saying, is maybe more favorable. If you have a Farside bus stop, and it's the back of the bus is 50 feet away from the intersection, which means the front of the bus is maybe up to 75 or 100 feet away from the intersection, which you can see very often are pedestrians kind of just not crossing at the crossing, but very close to it to reach the bus stop. And, sometimes they could be pedestrians in a hurry. They're trying to reach the bus before it moves. So, in some cases where we've done everything to improve that adjacent crossing and to ensure that, the conflicts are a minimum between pedestrians and motorists, and if you still have that type of issue, then, yeah, I would agree that you might have the need for putting in some sort of channelization to ensure pedestrians are following those designated paths. So there's no real resource that I can think of, but this is where it really comes down to just going out there and to the location of concern and observing what are the characteristics and why are people crossing where they are. And if it is solely the bus stop, then can you put the bus stop in a better location? One, if that doesn't work, then can you, or I guess simultaneously, can you put the bus stop in a different location, or can you also improve the crossings so that you're minimizing conflicts between pedestrians and other motor vehicles. And if none of those techniques work, then you have to kind of consider then is that maybe some sort of channelization is warranted to ensure that pedestrians are crossing in areas where at least it's recognized from the other user perspective that's where they expect to see pedestrians.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for our discussion. If we did not get to your question today, we will be addressing all of the submitted questions and posting them to the webinar page on our website as soon as possible. PBIC will sponsor our next webinar, Educating the Next Generation of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, Tools and Resources for Instructors, on Thursday, December 9th, 2010 at 2 p.m. And I will send the link out to the audience if you would like to register for that webinar. Once again, a recording and transcript of today's program as well as a view of the PDF slide presentation will be available in about a week at walkinginfo.org/webinars. Finally, I want to remind you that a very brief survey will appear once the webinar has ended. Again, we very much appreciate you taking the time out to complete it. Thank you again to our speaker, Dan, for joining us today. And thanks to all of you for attending today's PBIC and Federal Highway Administration Designing for Pedestrian Safety webinar. And this does conclude the DPS series. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.